I'm Lynn Pedotto with Adaptive Chicago Productions. Today we have as our guest Katie Frank, who is an occupational therapist with over 10 years experience working with people with disabilities. She is also pursuing her dissertation at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where her dissertation topic is Parents as the Primary Sexual Educators for Their Adolescents with Down Syndrome. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, Lynn. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. It's great to have you here. Before we dive into our questions, do you want to tell us a little bit about your dissertation and how you came about with this topic?
Absolutely. So I've spoken on the topic of sexuality a lot and found that parents aren't really receiving the information that they need in order to accurately teach their children with disabilities the various topics of sexuality. And so a coworker and I are creating a curriculum for parents who have adolescents with all different types of intellectual and developmental disabilities, so that the parents can learn not only what to teach, but how to teach it, and then also providing them with resources. But my dissertation portion is just going to research how parents of adolescents with Down syndrome effectively teach the topics based on attending the training that I'm doing in regards to the curriculum.
I'm sure it will be a great curriculum once it's fully developed.
I hope so.
I'm sure
we're working on that this summer.
Great. Well, what is sexuality and how does it differ from sex?
It's not uncommon to confuse the two, but really sexuality is so much more than just sexual intercourse or sexual needs and desires. It encompasses things like love and trust and friendships and respect, and it really focuses on how relationships develop and how we view ourselves. Our body image, our self-esteem. So it's much more than just sex.
Okay. Well, in schools, sex education is generally mandated at a certain level, generally around 6th or 7th grade. But it's often overlooked or not taught to students with disabilities. Why is that?
Well, I think it really comes down to first whose responsibility it is to teach sexuality education. And society really does feel that school is the main source for this education. But what happens is that the curriculums don't often include modifications so that individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities can learn the topics, because they have different learning styles than the typical population. And so if the individuals with IDD are in the classroom, they're not really understanding the information. And then if they're in their special education classroom, it's often not even provided in that setting. So that's why I really feel that it's important for the parents to become the primary sexuality educators for their children. And the other advantage of parents being the sexuality educators is that they can really include their values and beliefs in what they teach their children, whereas in the school setting, that's not necessarily going to happen.
I agree. I think parents should be able, or should instill their values and teach their child what's important, what they want to know. But it's often not being done even with typical children. So you're a parent and you have this child with an intellectual or cognitive disability. Where do they even start? Because it must feel like a big mountain for them to climb in order to teach this child.
Absolutely. So I think one of the first things is that parents have to realize that their children probably aren't going to come and ask them questions about different topics, whether it's about dating or relationships, friendships, because individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities may not even know what questions to ask. So that's why the parents really need to start with asking their children questions. And what's really important is that they need to understand that their children have a developmental age and a chronological age. So your chronological age is your actual age, so maybe you're a 12-year-old female, but your developmental age is more like how you can understand things cognitively. So if there's a 12-year-old female who might be around the developmental age of a 5 or 6-year-old, the parents would still need to talk to her about menstruation, because that's something that 12-year-old girls need to know about. But when they teach it to her, they would need to modify it to that of what a 5 or 6-year-old, how they would learn. So maybe providing visual supports and having social stories and using pictures in addition to verbal instruction will really help that child understand more about what menstruation is. The other important thing is that it takes a lot longer for someone with an intellectual and developmental disability to understand these concepts. So you have to introduce it sooner and then do a lot of repetition with the content so that they can understand it better.
So what do you mean by repetition?
So maybe a couple times a week, they're going to
Okay.
talk about this topic the same way over and over. So that's why stories are really good, because you can kind of read the story with the child a few times a week, and that won't seem redundant to the child, but it's a really good way to help them learn and understand better.
And are there resources available to help parents create these stories, or can you purchase them?
There are some, and it really depends on the topic. But a lot of times, if the child has a speech therapist or maybe even an occupational therapist in the school setting or in an outpatient setting, these therapists can help parents create something that's more specific to their child. Because a lot of times, if it's a picture of the child doing something or the parents doing something, it means more to the individual than just looking at a general picture.
Okay, so the parents should effectively work with their occupational therapist or their speech therapist in order to come up with some type of individual curriculum.
Yeah, they
basically.
can. And that's one of the things that the curriculum that I'm working on with my coworker, we're hoping to provide them with the basic information they need so they can actually create some of these things at home by themselves.
Okay, yeah, what a great resource that would be for parents. Well, there are many unspoken rules around relationships, rules which can be confusing to an adolescent with a disability. How do we teach the nuances of dating and other relationships to them?
You know, that's a really good question. It's tricky because so many of the rules are not black and white, and individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities don't really understand that gray area. So one of my favorite techniques is using the teachable moment. It's really a natural concept that happens, and it's a non-threatening way to work on some of these nuances. So perhaps the parents are sitting there with their adolescent with an intellectual and developmental disability watching TV, and a commercial comes on, and it's a young couple holding hands. So the parents can then say, "Oh, what's going on in this picture? Have you ever done that? Is that something you want to do? Oh, you have done it. Did you like it? Who was it with?" And so you can ask questions, but it's really not threatening because the child's still thinking they're kind of talking about the commercial. You can also use the teachable moment to find out what the child knows about certain things. So maybe a family member is pregnant. So then you can use that, "Oh, Lucy's pregnant. Do you know what that means? Do you know what's going on with her body and how that happens?" And they can find out. Because a lot of times, individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities don't get the social interactions that their typical peers do, and so a lot of times parents hope that their children get to learn this information from their peers at school, and they don't. And so sometimes parents need to use that teachable moment to figure out exactly what their child knows or if they understand what's going on.
Yeah, that happens a lot with my 14-year-old who has autism, high-functioning autism, and he'll come home and say something. And thank God he's talking to me, but my first question is, "Well, what do you know about this?" or "Do you understand what that word means?" And usually his response is no. But it definitely opens up a conversation in which I can tell him my understanding of it, and then we can start talking about it. So
Absolutely, that's really important.
it's very important. I wanted to go back actually because I meant to ask if a child is nonverbal, do we still teach them the same way, or are there modifications that a parent should be doing?
Well, it still comes down to the parent's going to know their child the best. So you want to teach all these concepts in ways that are best for that individual. So even a nonverbal child can still understand concepts. They just might not be able to verbalize their understanding, but they're going to have some other ways to communicate, whether it's a communication device, communication board, sign language, things like that. So you still do want to talk about it because they probably will be able to understand it. You just have to figure out ways to determine their comprehension.
Okay, that's good to know. Now with schools and the nuances of dating and relationships, there have been stories of adolescents who get in trouble because they don't understand. Should the parents be forming a relationship with the schools ahead of time in order to offset any difficulties, or is it just kind of one day you're going to get a phone call and saying your child inappropriately touched someone?
I think both. It would be great for the parents to have a relationship with the school, but I think it really comes down to the staff at the school being trained. Because they're now security guards, there's other staff at the school that are not necessarily teachers, and they might not know how to best handle situations with with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So one of the stories that I had was that one of my adolescent clients who had Down syndrome was wearing a hoodie in school, and it was because he got overwhelmed by the sensory input in the school. Well, the security guard approached him, touched him, and like pulled his hoodie off of his head. So the child, who doesn't like to be touched and didn't like the sound, tried to hit the security guard. And so there was this huge thing, and he was going to get expelled, but it's because the security guard didn't truly understand the needs of that specific child. So it's really important that training occurs in schools, I think.
Okay, and I think that's something every parent should be pushing for.
Absolutely.
Is adequate training, and hopefully someday it will be mandated by government that everyone has to be trained. So.
And I think it's so important too, because parents are pushing so much for these individuals to be included in regular education classrooms, and so it's really important that the schools provide the best and safest environment for these students, and I think training would help with that.
I agree. Well, adults with disabilities, they can have the same desires and wants as typical adults, which can include marriage and also children, but often these wants are discouraged. What can we do to overcome barriers so they can develop relationships of all kinds?
Well, I think the fact that parents are even willing to talk about some of these topics, that's one of the biggest barriers and obstacles to addressing this, I think. And so the fact that they're acknowledging this and talking about it, that's the first thing to do. But there aren't even just society barriers or attitudes and myths and misperceptions. There's financial barriers that prevent individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities from getting married and having families. There's also just policies. So individuals who live in group homes, sometimes the group homes don't have a policy about relationships or intimate relationships, or they just say their policy is that they aren't going to allow it. So then these individuals are going out and trying to find a different environment to go and engage in sexual activities, which is probably a less safe option. But I think that parents can start advocating for their children and talking about the importance and the rights that their children have to be sexual beings, and then the individuals themselves can become sexual self-advocates.
Yeah, that brings up a great point, because I've heard stories of the Scillas where a couple wants to get married, but they can't find a group home to take them, or one lives out of state and one lives in another state, and they can't get married or live together because that would mean if one moved to the other state, they would have to go to the bottom of the list again.
Absolutely.
So do you have any recommendations for policies that could be developed? And I know I'm just throwing this to you, but it's interesting because there definitely needs to be more awareness, and then people to start thinking about it at government and also a help level, where we're actually thinking about how do we set it up so that these people can lead as normal a life as they want, which includes being married and maybe having children, instead of being afraid and burying their head in the sand and say, oh, no, that's not happening.
Right, and I think it just really comes down back to the advocating and talking about it and making it more of a social issue, because I think people are like, oh, again, they don't think that individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities have these sexual needs and desires. And some may not, but others do, just like their typical peers. So I think it's really just making people more aware that these relationships are happening, and we need to do what we can to support them.
Yeah, when you were talking about how they're not aware, I read as part of this research a story in which a girl asked for a pregnancy test, and she went to her school, and because she had some type of disability, the teacher said, oh no, she doesn't need a pregnancy test, there's no way she can be pregnant. But it did turn out that she was pregnant. So I guess you're saying that just the more parents start talking to teachers and talking to legislators and just people in general about the sexual needs of their children, then hopefully it's going to we're going to have a boomerang effect.
I hope so, and I think it also comes down to sexuality is much more. It's talked about a lot more now than I think it has been in the past. And I think as people become more and more comfortable talking about it and realizing all of us are sexual beings, I think some changes can be made.
Do you have any final words about just sexuality and how we can encourage parents and even for people who say they're watching the show and they have some type of special need. Maybe words that can help them to advocate for themselves.
Well, I think it's just really important that they acknowledge that they're sexual beings and they talk to people and express their interest to be in relationships. And relationships are more than just intimate relationships. I mean, it's all about developing friendships and learning all the social norms that it takes to have these relationships. So it's really not just about intercourse and, you know, intimacy. It's really about developing relationships as a whole.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate your being with us. And thank you. Hopefully this segment will open up dialogues in your home. And we appreciate your watching this show. Thank you.